On May 25, 2025, a freight train left western China carrying 32 containers. It did not go to a port. It did not touch an ocean. It rolled west through scorching desert, climbed across mountain ranges, passed through 4 countries, and arrived in Iran 15 days later. 10,400 kilometers. No ships, no sea, no American warship within 1,000 miles of any of it. That single journey quietly punched a massive hole in one of the most powerful economic weapons the United States has ever used against another country, and most people have no idea it happened. For decades, economic sanctions have been America's tool of choice for squeezing countries it cannot go to war with. Cut off the oil sales, freeze the bank accounts, block access to global markets. Make the pain so severe that the government has no choice but to change its behavior. It is a strategy that works because it exploits one basic fact. Almost everything moves by sea, and the sea is something America has always controlled. Control the narrow passages, the choke points, and you do not need to fire a single shot. You do not need troops on the ground. You do not need a formal declaration of war. You just need to be the dominant force on the water, and for the last 80 years, that has been the United States without serious challenge. China watched this playbook for years. It watched America use it against Iran. It watched America use it against Russia. It watched America threaten to use it against China itself during moments of tension over Taiwan. And starting roughly 2 decades ago, Beijing quietly began building a way out, not through military force, not through diplomacy, through rail lines, tunnels dug through earthquake zones, and bogey exchange stations at remote border crossings in Central Asia. This video is about that project, what it cost, how it works, and what it signals about where global power is heading. Because this is not a story about a train. It is about a parallel world being built underneath the one we think we understand. To get why this matters so much, you need to understand one specific vulnerability that has kept Chinese strategic planners awake for years. There is a narrow strip of water in Southeast Asia that most Americans have never thought about for a single second of their lives. It sits between Malaysia and Indonesia, at its narrowest point, less than 2 miles wide. It is called the Strait of Malacca, and it is one of the most strategically important pieces of geography on the entire planet. Over 94,000 ships pass through it every single year. Oil tankers, container vessels, bulk carriers, liquefied natural gas ships, all of them funneling through that single corridor to move between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. That is roughly 1 ship every 5.5 minutes, around the clock, every single day of the year. For China, this waterway is not just important, it is existential. Approximately 80% of China's oil imports pass through the Strait of Malacca. 80%. That is a single thread holding up an $18 trillion economy. Every factory, every power plant, every military vehicle in China ultimately depends on energy, and almost all of that energy flows through one narrow corridor where 2 coastlines nearly touch. Here is what made Chinese planners genuinely alarmed. Since 2019, the United States has had the right to dock warships and aircraft carriers at Singapore's deep water naval bases. Singapore sits right at the entrance to the Strait of Malacca. A U.S. carrier group positioned there could, in a serious conflict, functionally close that passage within 24 hours. One decision in Washington, and China's energy supply flips off like a light switch. Chinese strategists have a name for this. They call it the Malacca Dilemma. It has been discussed openly in Chinese military and academic literature for over 15 years. The dilemma is simple. You cannot build a superpower on a foundation your primary rival can collapse with a phone call. Maritime alternatives exist. The Lombok Strait and the Sunda Strait both run through Indonesia and could theoretically serve as detours. But both add thousands of kilometers to any voyage, and neither has the port infrastructure or the depth to absorb anywhere close to the volume that currently moves through Malacca. Rerouting even a fraction of China's energy supply through those alternatives would take years of investment and complete logistical restructuring. The ocean was always going to be a vulnerability. The only real solution was to leave it behind, and the only country whose geography made that possible was Iran. Iran sits at the intersection of Central Asia, the Middle East, and the Caucasus. It borders Iraq, Turkey, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. It has direct access to the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman in the south, and it sits directly beside the Strait of Hormuz, another one of those global choke points, this one controlling roughly 20% of all the world's daily oil supply. Connect to Iran by land, and you have a direct route from the Chinese interior to the heart of the Middle East without touching a single ocean the U.S. Navy patrols. That is the prize. That is what justified $2 billion of investment, years of engineering nightmares, and the diplomatic cost of doing deep business with a country under heavy American sanctions. Now let us talk about what actually building this thing required, because the obstacles were genuinely extraordinary. The railway begins in the Xinjiang region of western China and heads due west. The first major country it crosses is Kazakhstan, a nation roughly the size of Western Europe, with vast stretches of semi-arid steppe and desert that are brutally hot in summer and bitterly cold in winter. From Kazakhstan, the line moves through Uzbekistan, then Turkmenistan, before finally crossing into northeastern Iran and arriving at a dry port called Afrin near Tehran. 10,400 kilometers through 4 countries with 4 governments, 4 custom systems, and track gauges that were never designed to be compatible with each other. That last problem caused real headaches at the engineering level. Russia and the former Soviet republics use a broader track gauge than China or Iran. That is a legacy of how the Soviet rail network was originally built, partly to prevent easy military invasion by rail from Western Europe. The consequence is that a train leaving China cannot just roll all the way to Tehran on the same wheels. At the border crossings where the gauge changes, the wheel sets under each carriage have to be mechanically swapped out. On older systems, this process used to take hours per train. Hours of delay at every border crossing would have killed the commercial viability of the entire route. So automated bogie exchange stations were engineered and built specifically for this corridor. Specialized hydraulic equipment lifts each carriage, removes the old wheel set, inserts the correct one, and lowers the carriage back down. The whole operation now takes under 30 minutes per train. That single engineering investment was substantial, and it was necessary for every commercial trip the line would ever run. Then, there is the terrain itself. Parts of the route in Iran run through zones classified as highly seismically active. Iran sits on the collision boundary between the Arabian and Eurasian tectonic plates, which means earthquakes are not rare events. They are a regular feature of the landscape. Building rail infrastructure designed to last decades through terrain that shakes periodically requires foundation engineering that significantly increases cost and complexity, and certain stretches were built underground entirely, not just for weather protection against the sandstorms that grind surface infrastructure apart over time, but specifically to protect against the possibility of airstrikes. That design decision tells you exactly how both governments thought about this project. This was not infrastructure built for a peaceful and stable future. It was built to function during a crisis, under pressure, when everything else might be going wrong. On May 25, 2025, the first full corridor freight train completed the journey, 15 days, western China to Iran. The previous standard for that route was between 30 and 40 days by sea, assuming no delays, no port congestion, no disruptions. The railway cut it in half, with no Strait of Malacca, no Indian Ocean patrol zones, no Arabian Sea choke points, and no Western-controlled ports anywhere in the chain. What this means for Iran runs much deeper than a faster delivery schedule. Western sanctions on Iran have been layered and tightened over multiple decades. Iranian banks were cut off from the SWIFT international payments network. Oil buyers in Europe, Japan, South Korea, and India were warned that purchasing Iranian crude would get them sanctioned themselves, effectively shutting Tehran out of every major market that operated in dollars through Western-linked financial institutions. Iran's oil exports dropped from over 2 million barrels per day before 2018 to under 500,000 at the low point. Government revenues collapsed. The rial lost over 80% of its value against the dollar. Inflation hit levels that made daily life genuinely painful for ordinary people. China decided this was an opportunity. In 2021, China and Iran signed a 25-year comprehensive cooperation agreement worth $400 billion, covering energy, infrastructure, manufacturing, and technology. That is not a routine trade deal. That is a generational economic alliance, structured deliberately outside the reach of American financial pressure. In 2024, China bought 77% of all of Iran's crude oil exports, worth roughly $29 billion in a single year. Total Iranian oil revenues that year reached $67 billion, a level the country had not seen in over a decade. The sanctions were still officially on the books, the legal text was still there, but the real-world impact was shrinking fast because China had decided to absorb Iran's export capacity and price the sanctions risk into its own cost structure. With the railway now running, those oil shipments do not need to pass through any route the West can monitor or disrupt. Iran loads oil onto trains. They roll east through Central Asian countryside. The transaction settles in yuan. No Western bank touches the money. No Western-controlled port handles the cargo. No insurance underwriter linked to European financial markets has any involvement anywhere in the chain. The entire system operates outside the architecture that gives American sanctions their teeth. This is not Iran and China breaking the rules. It is Iran and China building a system where those rules simply do not apply. You cannot sanction a railway running through sovereign territory. You cannot board a train to inspect cargo the way you can intercept a ship in international waters. The legal framework underpinning economic coercion by sea has no equivalent on land. That gap is precisely what this railway was designed to exploit. The currency dimension reinforces all of it. China has been paying for Iranian oil in yuan since 2012. That might sound like a technical financial detail. The long-term weight of it is enormous. The dollar's role as the world's default currency for energy transactions is one of the structural pillars of American global influence. Because oil is globally priced in dollars, every country on Earth needs to hold dollar reserves to buy energy. That constant demand keeps the dollar strong, keeps U.S. borrowing costs low, and gives Washington a lever it can pull by threatening to cut off access to the dollar-based financial system. Every time a significant oil deal settles in yuan instead of dollars, that lever loses a small but real amount of grip. Russia pursued a parallel strategy after 2022, settling growing shares of its energy exports in yuan and rubles. The China-Iran Railway adds another segment of global energy trade to the column outside American financial reach. None of these individual shifts is decisive on its own. Together, they are building something. Now zoom out from Iran and the strategic value gets even larger. Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Afghanistan are completely landlocked. No coastline, no direct port access, no ability to move cargo to global markets without crossing someone else's territory first. That geographic reality has kept them economically marginal for generations. Their options for integrating into global supply chains were limited, and the limited options they had ran primarily through systems shaped by Russian or Western influence. A functioning rail corridor from China through Central Asia to Iranian ports on the Persian Gulf changes that calculation entirely. Goods from Kyrgyzstan can move to Tehran. Raw materials from Tajikistan can flow east to Chinese industry. Afghan mineral deposits, estimated to potentially be worth trillions of dollars and including significant rare earth concentrations that the global technology industry increasingly needs, become accessible without anyone controlling a single ocean. China deepens its influence across an entire region in the process. Countries that depend on Chinese infrastructure and market access for their own economic survival tend to align their foreign policy accordingly. That is structural dependency, and it is one of the most durable forms of leverage that exists in international relations. The five-nation corridor takes this logic further. The full plan connects China, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, and Iran in one continuous rail network, with roughly 1,300 kilometers of new track, about half of it running through northern Afghanistan. In May 2023, the first test cargo ran from Iran into Afghanistan along a section called the Kaf Heret Railway. That shipment carried 655 tons of railway construction equipment. The very first cargo the newly connected line carried was the tools needed to build more of the network. The railway was literally shipping its own future into existence one delivery at a time. Simultaneously, in the completely opposite direction, China is developing a route through the Arctic. The Northern Sea Route runs along Russia's northern coast through the Arctic Ocean. the most direct shipping path between the major industrial centers of Asia and the ports of northern Europe. The problem has always been ice. Until recently, the route was realistically usable for roughly 88 days per year. That window is expanding as Arctic temperatures rise. China and Russia signed a formal agreement in June 2024 to develop a year-round container shipping line through the Arctic. Russia's commitment to the route is visible in its icebreaker fleet. The Arktika weighs 33,000 tons, runs on 2 nuclear reactors, can crack through ice 3 meters thick at a steady continuous speed, and operates for 7 full years without refueling. Russia is commissioning newer and more capable versions on a steady cadence, each generation reaching further into territory the previous ones struggled to navigate. What the Arctic route strategically bypasses is worth understanding. The Suez Canal handles roughly 12% of global trade. It sits within a zone of deep Western diplomatic and financial influence. Insurance, financing, and logistics for ships using Suez run overwhelmingly through European and American institutions. A viable Arctic route bypasses all of that entirely. No Middle East geopolitics, no Suez Canal Authority, no American military presence within 5,000 kilometers. The route runs through Russian and international Arctic waters, and the institutions governing its use would be Russian and Chinese, not Western. 2 routes taking shape simultaneously, one cutting through the heart of Central Asia, one pushing through the frozen north. Both designed to function outside the oceans and financial systems the West has shaped for generations. Now for the honest counter-argument, because this story does not only run in one direction, the physical limits of rail are real and substantial. A single modern supertanker carries 2 million barrels of oil in one voyage. To move an equivalent volume by freight train, you would need hundreds of fully loaded tanker wagons. Scaling rail to match global maritime trade volume is not possible in any near-term time frame. The ocean remains the dominant medium for moving large quantities long distances and will stay that way for the foreseeable future. And then there is what happened 19 days after the first freight train completed its historic run. 19 days. Israel conducted a large-scale attack targeting Iranian oil and gas infrastructure. The strikes hit production facilities with significant precision. No further public freight services on the China-Iran corridor were reported in the weeks that followed. The railway went quiet almost as fast as it had started. Fixed rail infrastructure is fundamentally more vulnerable than mobile maritime assets. You cannot move a railway. A 100-meter section of destroyed track stops an entire corridor cold. In a region with the security volatility of the Middle East, that vulnerability is not theoretical, it showed up immediately. But that setback does not disprove the fundamental logic of the project, it tests it. The sections built underground already reflect an acknowledgement of exactly this risk built directly into the engineering. As investment deepens, hardening the corridor will be part of the agenda. More importantly, the railway does not need to run every day at full capacity to change the strategic calculation. It just needs to exist. When China has a functioning land route for its energy supply, the threat of a naval blockade at Malacca carries less absolute weight. When Iran has a committed buyer operating completely outside Western financial systems, sanctions lose their grip. Changing the math on a key pressure point by that magnitude shifts how every confrontation in the region gets calculated, even if the train is sitting still. There is one more dimension to this that logistics and economics cannot fully capture: signal. Every kilometer of track China lays through Central Asia sends a message to countries watching from the outside. The message is not stated directly. It does not need to be. The message is the railway itself. It says, there is another option. You do not have to denominate your debt in dollars. You do not have to route your trade through Western-controlled ports. You do not have to shape your foreign policy around the preferences of Washington or Brussels. For smaller countries that have historically had limited choices, that message lands with real weight even when the Chinese alternative comes with its own conditions attached. What America is watching is not simply a railway, it is the slow but deliberate construction of an alternative to a system the West spent generations building and defending, a system built on naval dominance, dollar dependency, and control over the choke points of global trade. That alternative is incomplete. It faces serious obstacles. The Arctic route is decades from viability at scale. The the Central Asian corridors face engineering challenges and security risks that will take years to resolve. But infrastructure does not require completion to start changing the world. Rail corridors shift trade flows and economic dependencies long before every kilometer of track is laid. The direction is set, the momentum is real, and what is being built, from the first freight train into Iran to nuclear-powered icebreakers carving through 3-meter ice at the top of the world, is not measured in today's cargo volumes. It is measured in the shape of the world being built for tomorrow. Drop your take in the comments. Do you think a land route across Central Asia and an Arctic highway can genuinely put a dent in Western control of global trade? Or does the ocean still win this one? Hit like if this was worth your time, subscribe so you catch what comes next, and I will see you there.